In post-war Yugoslavia, under the gaze of President Tito, there was a desire to develop a new way of living with an approach to architecture and planning that was a radical break from the past. Gargantuan blocks housing thousands of people that would provide for a family's every need. The objective was a communist utopia. Nowhere in the country epitomised these ideals more than Yugoslavia's capital, Belgrade, where a whole new city was laid out on the west bank of the Sava River. It was called New Belgrade, and these days it's a district renowned for some of the world's best examples of the form of architecture known as Brutalism. So, if we're going to travel back in time to Yugoslavia, then we need the right car.
Okay, so this car is a typical Yugoslav car, and the company has started after the Second World War. This car, I think it's from the 70s. I know it's from the 70s, so it's 50 years old. And yeah, what should I say about this car? I mean, it was a symbol of Yugoslavia, and transport. Every family had it. It was like a family car. But also, the important thing to say that Yugoslavia exported this typical car to the US, and for 2 years it was really, really good sold. But after 2 years, since Yugoslavia didn't make a progress with, the industry of automotive industry really progressed in those ages, and this car didn't progress. So it was called the worst car of the year. So yeah. But now in the US there's a big cult of the Yugo, which is not this one. This one is Zastava 101, and we call it KITS. It means one. The other car, the Yugo car, that was the car that was called the worst car of the year, and now it's kind of an old-timer. So if you want to buy Yugo in America, you need about $5,000 to do it, because it's really rare. Right now we are driving in one of the biggest boulevards in New Belgrade. It's called the Boulevard of Milutin Milankovic, which was a scientist who came from Serbia. The New Belgrade, as its name says, started building after the Second World War. So the Yugoslavia actually built it. After the Second World War, before the Second World War, Belgrade was just on that side, the old side of the Belgrade, from the other side of the Sava River, and it's kind of a historical city. A lot of Turkish influence, a lot of Ottoman influence, but also Austro-Hungarian influence. There's a mixture of everything. But after the Second World War, since Yugoslavia needed to shift from the agricultural country to an really big industrial country, a lot of people need to move to the cities, to the urban areas. So Yugoslavia had two-way streets of thinking about expanding Belgrade. One way was, okay, we need a place for a lot of people to live in, and the other way is we need the new capital. So the new capital was kind of a New Belgrade.
We're now going to visit one of the most famous examples of Brutalist architecture anywhere in the world. This is the Genex Tower.
Okay, we are standing on the ground of the Genex Tower, on the communal space. The Genex Tower is one big, really famous Brutalist building. It's in a modernist style. Architect is Mihailo Mitrovic. It was built for a company called Genex. It was a really big Yugoslav profitable company. It was an export-import company. It exported and imported from all over from Europe and also the world. It has two parts. It consists of two parts. One part is a business and one part is residential. The residential part is still in use. People also still live here. And the business part was publicly owned for about 40 years, and then in the past few years it was bought by a private investor. It's a bit of a controversial story, but it's abandoned. There's nothing inside. Also, one big important detail is that at the top of the building inside there's a bridge, and on the bridge there's a restaurant that should have been rotating. It has a beautiful panoramic view of the Belgrade, but it never rotated. Actually, they thought it was too expensive when they came up with it. And we can't go up, but the restaurant is like a time capsule. It's in a modernist style. It still has its chairs, it still has the cushions, it still has the menus. It's in a pink and blue, so it's kind of a contrast. You know, it's brutalistic buildings. It's beton brut. It's really gray, and the inside of the restaurant is kind of like pink. So the mural that you're seeing is the original mural from the artist Lazar Vojaklia, which was a friend of an architect who made this building. And these letters say that this building is built by a collective of rad, which means work. It was a collective of workers. It was designed by an architect, Mihailo Mitrovic, and painted by painter Lazar Vojaklia in 1971.
And during Yugoslav time, these were not shops, were they?
Yes, they were communal spaces. I don't know particular ones, but mostly those were spaces for children, for leisure, places where people got together, had fun.
And this was part of the utopian ideal, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was the point. And also, like, the big part of the Yugoslav social housing, not just social housing, but everything, is building a community. So it was really important that you have communal areas in the building where you live in. And also, if you think about, you have children, and you go to work, and your children go home from school, they need a place to be in, not to be on the streets. So the community kind of took care of them. So the kids played together from one block, and they had some people watching over them. Those little ornaments on the building, as I would say. It's a modernist building, it's a brutalist building. So, for the modernist architects, the ornaments were crime. We don't need ornaments because it's bougie, it's bourgeois. We don't need, we are in a new era of the world. But if the architect is good, which this one is also, obviously, he did the little things that were actually useful because it was a sunshade at one point, but also it's kind of an ornament, It's really minimal, but it's an ornament. Okay, so we're standing in an air shaft of the Genex building, of the part of the building that is residential. And it is really important part of the planning of the building is that every room needs to have natural air. So these rooms that are oriented towards the air shaft, those rooms are installation rooms. I would say those are kitchens, those are probably bathrooms.
It might have been practical, but it feels like I've walked into an apocalyptic movie.
On the outskirts of the Block 23, it's one of the, I would say, in my personal opinion, best blocks of the New Belgrade, and also the Yugoslav modernism, because they this was not the first block made. They had experience about the blocks they already made, and also they did a lot of studies on these blocks, a lot of studies, architectural, urbanistic studies, like psychological studies of the people, societal studies, and everything. And this block was made for the workers and families for the Yugoslav army. So it was kind of a very important block. Of course, not all of the people were soldiers. Some of them were engineers, some of them were, I don't know, cooks or whatever, but it was really important block to be made. It has more than 2,000 apartments, and it was made for about 7,500 people.
What is the definition of a block?
There's an anecdote about the Yugoslav New Belgrade They call it the Modernist playground because it was a dump. There was nothing there. You couldn't do anything about it. And people, architects, urbanists, but also the government wanted to try new things. So if you think about the block, if you think about the New Belgrade as a block, the block is the buildings on the outskirts, some buildings maybe inside, closed from the outside and opened on the inside to the people who live in it. Also the people who are visiting. You could come in, you can join, you can walk around, but if you look at it outside, you can't imagine what is it inside.
Like a self-sufficient town.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that because this block, the block we are standing in, it's a really big block, 7,500 inhabitants. It was planned for that much people. So they needed to think of a way that people and children who live here are kind of safe. So they had here school, they had kindergartens, they had communal services, they had leisure spaces, they also have sports spaces and everything like that. So if you're a child living in this block, you shouldn't have left it in. Why would you do it? You would go to the kindergarten here, you would go to school, you would play with your friends inside the block. So it was kind of a really safe place to live in and really safe place to leave your child in. This says Mlekara, which was the original sign. It was a place where you could buy milk. It was a milk shop. Okay, so the block number system, if you look at the plan of Belgrade, of the New Belgrade, it would be kind of chaotic because it doesn't make sense. So they didn't name the blocks according to the spatial system. They made it when they were made. So it was first the block 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then to block 70, but it was made, as they made it, they gave the number to the block. And it was not made spatial, it was made a bit randomly. If it wasn't randomly, it was urbanistically with the needs of the expanding of the Belgrade. But if you look at it nowadays, it doesn't make sense.
A building that does make sense is the Contemporary Art Museum that was opened in 1965. Described as the jewel at the confluence, it has recently reopened after 10 years of renovations and shows both local and international artists in spacious galleries that perfectly complement the artworks.
For me personally, I think that this is a really good example of a modernist building. You know, it has horizontal lines, you as a person can walk through it, everything is kind of, you know, fluffy, but if you look at the building, it's kind of very, very strict. So yeah, after this building was opened in the 60s, but if you look at it like more than 60 years later, it still looks quite nice. You probably then know that Tito said no to Stalin, so he was a bit afraid that Russia is gonna attack Yugoslavia at any point. So every building that you see in new part of the Belgrade, especially the buildings that were really, really important for the government, had atomic shelters underneath. So underneath all this plateau that you see that is really big, there are atomic shelters.
We've been to the Western Gate, but now we're crossing the river to visit the collection of towers known as the Eastern Gate.
Right now we are at the Eastern Gate. It's a gate to the city on the eastern side. It's also situated on a highway. It's also a modernist, brutalist building. It's on a circular shape. Most importantly, it was designed by a female architect. Her name was Vera Cirkovic. She was the main architect of this building. But the name Rudo, it's an official name. It's the name of the building because the guy who was overlooking the construction, who was also an architect, Drago Ljubimićević, he came from a city called Rudo in Bosnia, so it just became an official name of the building. It's shamefully poorly maintained. Also, the building has terraces that are also communal, and most of the people in the town can use it. In the building can use it. It's also a concrete building. It doesn't have any ornaments, as you can see. It's mostly the form of the building that is kind of impression, that has that impression that it's a big building, that it's a gate to a city, that it's, you know, it's really big, it's really tall, and also that grey concrete gives that meaning.
This feels like stepping back into Yugoslavia, doesn't it?
Literally, yeah.
Communism, Tito, and indeed Yugoslavia have all been confined to the history books. And that utopia, well, it may never quite have been realised, but the thousands of residents of these crumbling blocks are still very proud to call New Belgrade their home.